everyone. Oh, please, Dan, go. You're first.
Thank you. If you don't know me, I'm Dan Mullin, and I want to thank you so much for coming tonight and supporting our candidate. It's really special. I go back a ways with Joe because I was on his father's finance committee, so we don't talk about age, but I'm old. But I am absolutely thrilled to have him here. I'm so proud because of what he's doing. He's our shining light in such a rotten, dark world. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Bryan Rafanelli.
Thank you, Dan. I called Dan a couple months ago because this is the most coveted property in Provincetown. Every Democrat in the world comes here. As you all know, thank you. I don't know how many fundraisers you're going to this weekend, but and I'm serious about it. And I was like, Dan, do not commit to anybody but Joe Kennedy. I am a proud member of Joe Kennedy's finance committee, and I can tell you back of the house is doing quite well. We have a really strong finance committee. Joe's done an amazing job along with the man that chairs it.
2020!
That manages, David Bellick is his chair. He does an amazing job. Works very hard at, certainly on the fundraising side, to keep Joe busy every date that we can possibly get from him. I think we all know that this is the name of the game, and that every 2 years, a congressperson has to raise as much money as possible. On that note, what I wanted to say to you is, by giving to Joe, Joe gives to others. Joe's been a leader on identifying at least 25 seats that we can flip this fall, and I think that is probably what we all want more than anything, other than getting Joe reelected. I am going to make him tell you what every name of every 25 person, all 25 people backwards, actually. But no, seriously, the amount of time and energy that he's actually empowered a whole group of people that have gotten together. He's hosted 2 events, one in Boston, one in New York, with these candidates, giving them 90 seconds each to speak in front of a group of people that are deeply financially invested to flip the House. And Joe has put his light on that. So he'll talk about immigration, he'll talk about health care. I hope he'll also talk about why we're going to win the House. But if you're curious about a race at this moment and why to give to Joe Kennedy, this is the moment to give to Joe Kennedy, because he is going to help us win the House back and, God willing, get our country back. So with that, before that, Dan Mullin, I love you. I just want to make sure that we all love you. Thank you again. Thank you for opening your house. All right, sorry, Joe.
Thank you guys for coming. Really grateful. I don't get to Provincetown all that often, although I've been here enough to know that this is, in fact, the most highly coveted piece of property here. Two, that the reason why all of us come to places like this are beautiful summer evenings, and you don't get all that many of them. And all of you decided to come here this evening. And I also recognize the fact that for most of you, that's not to come spend time with a member of Congress at the least popular time in recent political history on anything. But because one of these 2 gentlemen asked you to be here. I go back an awfully long way with both of them. My family goes back a long way with Dan. My dad, my Uncle Teddy, certainly. I'm staying down this weekend at my grandmother's place in Hyannis with my brother, his wife, and their 3 little girls, 4, 2, and a 6-month-old. They met at Dan's property in Otis Place.
Matchmaker.
There you go. Matchmaker 101. So, thank you. Thank you for opening up your home for me, for sharing it with so many other folks during these last couple of years, and particularly a particularly demanding campaign cycle. Incredibly kind of you to do it, and I'm grateful for it, Dan. Thank you. Really grateful. And for Bryan, whenever I call Bryan, I normally get his voicemail because he's normally traveling someplace, and he's always working. I think I've known him to take about 4 or 5 days off, period, since I actually got to know him. He's working to grow a business that has become, obviously, one of the premier event planning companies, certainly in the country, if not around the world. And in every spare moment that I have known him, he is throwing himself at something else. Whether it was getting a dear friend elected to the presidency back in 2016, which, by the way, she did. To almost a whole lot of other big organizations in Boston and around our community. And every state dinner down in Washington, D.C. for the 8 years before that. Bryan throws himself at everything. And I'm incredibly grateful to have him and his support, and Mark's as well. And it means the world to me that given everything else that you've got on your plate, so somebody on the way in said, what do you make of the past week in Washington? And I literally didn't have words to say. I don't, there were so many, somebody else gave me the advice on a plane, I think, recently saying, look, you guys got to not get distracted by the shiny objects of the latest news cycle. You got to focus on the bad thing. I was like, pick the bad thing out of the week. Which one do you want to focus on? NATO? The visit to Great Britain? And to the Queen, wearing the brooch from the Obamas. How about that? That was some A1 trolling by so this visit that was ill-advised from the beginning, obviously, with Vladimir Putin, but I think even those of us that didn't expect this to go well, we're hoping that it wouldn't turn out the way it did, and have been so sad and so disappointed, angered, outraged, all of it. And then one after the next, from the statements to then the attempted cleanup, and then the doubling down of the statements again, and then a cleanup again, and the fact that we are still today trying to learn what agreements the President of the United States made because of press releases through Russian media, through Vladimir Putin and his administration's discussions with their own state-run media institutes. And that's how we're understanding what our president has agreed to. And that's not just me saying that as a member of a Democratic opposition, but that's the Director of National Intelligence who says he doesn't know what was agreed in the room. That's the U.S. military who says they don't know what was agreed to in the room. And those are issues like Crimea, and a referendum on Crimea to try to give President Putin the legitimacy for actually invading and stealing land. That's the incredible deal that President Trump framed as creating a U.S. ambassador for 12 people that were indicted for interfering with our election. This is what's trickling out day after day. And so, yeah, we're responding to it, but that other point that gentleman made to me of saying, hey, you can't get distracted, that's also not wrong. And this is the challenge that we face in this dynamic of chaos one day after the next, and trying to respond to what needs responding to, because it does. But not lose sight of the overall and overarching intent of this administration, which is literally divide and conquer. But dividing and conquering an American electorate for pure political purposes and political gain. And I have never once, ever, heard of an elected official that has actually defined success in this country as a zero-sum game vis-a-vis another slice of our American citizen. Where in order for somebody to win, another piece of American society has to lose. And not only to diagnose it that way, but to champion it that way. To feed into those base instincts, and to, rather than say, there is a common future and a common past, and we can fight for that future together, and if we do, it's going to be brighter for everybody. Say, no, you only win if somebody else loses. We can extend health care to Mississippi and Alabama if we take it away from Massachusetts and New York. We can extend provisions for DACA recipients and protect them if you cut health care for poor kids. That was literally a choice offered to us by the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, choosing between the CHIP and DACA. Choose one. No reason. But that's the framework of the big authority. And so I get asked all the time, what do we do? How do you fight back? You vote. And you do everything we possibly can to make sure in every single damn election between now and then, you vote. And you engage, and you roll up your sleeves and you fight. Phone banks, email, Facebook, friend groups. I guarantee you, every single one here knows somebody who did not vote in the last election. And if every single one of us makes sure that every person that you know votes, and they make sure that every person that they know votes, we win. And if you doubt that, they know it too. Which is why Republicans have engaged in a systematic and strategic effort to actually block people's right to vote all over the country, going back now for years, but certainly exacerbated under this administration. And if you doubt that, look at the Voter Integrity Commission, tried to be headlined by Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State in Canada. This is not accidental. This is not one-off. But it is an acknowledgement that they're on the wrong side of the American public. And it is an acknowledgement that if we do what we need to do, if you stand up and you speak out, and you fight for your neighbor, and you fight for your friends, and you fight for your family, and you're willing to vote, we will win. And so, yes, I'm grateful for all of your support here today. I'm running around the country like crazy for, over the course of the past couple of months, and certainly through the next couple of months, supporting what is emphatically the best recruiting class of candidates that I've ever seen or ever heard of, period, on either side of the aisle. Many of you have met a number of these candidates. They're spectacular. And they are good enough that they will keep these races close regardless of what happens in a national election. Regardless of where the president's popularity is, the message, the caliber of these candidates, they've got something to say, and they are offering a choice to the districts they seek to represent. That choice will be a lot better if we are able to make sure that they have the resources to fight back against the $1 billion that is coming on their head. And it's $1 billion in pledges already. So I'm grateful for the help, grateful for the support, grateful that you were all willing to give up a beautiful Saturday evening to spend a little time with me and with our host today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing it. I'm happy to take any questions people have. And if you got any advice, take that too.
I get asked all the time to donate to contribute to help people, but in this whole, I don't feel like I need to help you. I'm happy to, but I don't feel like I need to help you. You're gonna win.
Let's hope.
But I want to know that list of people to send money to, because I do get calls from across the country. I don't know. I don't know who to give money to and who not to, but I'd be happy to.
So, a couple of things since Bryan kind of teed this up. For anybody that is interested in engaging, kind of broader engagement across the country, I'm happy to follow up with you separately. There is kind of a competitive playing field, go broad to narrow. We have Democratic challengers. There's a Democrat running in 431 out of 435 races. So we are leaving literally almost no stone unturned. Out of that, you can carry that winnow down the Cook Political Report, which is kind of the kind of top-notch independent guru that looks at all of these races in the House and says what's competitive, what not. Have essentially identified 60 races across the country. The vast majority of them are held by Republicans, and they give us about a 60% chance of flipping the House. That list of 60 competitive races swings between much more likely Democrat to reaching. It stretches obviously across the country geographically. It also stretches across the country through various segments. One, there's a number of veterans. Two, there are LGBT candidates. Three, there's women candidates. Four, there's candidates that are running on health. Right? Five, there's candidates that are running against specific representatives from that fall in categories on the Republican side. Right? So if there are certain issues out there that are particularly important to you, or focus areas that you want to focus on, I'm happy to kind of slice that list up a little bit more directly to you. And if you think that you just want to help support as many of these as you can, I'm happy to help you donate to all 60 of your groups.
I want to give to the ones that have a chance.
So here's the real answer on the ones that have a chance. I can tell you right now, the top 25 to 30 races that I say they all legitimately have a chance. I will also be humble enough to tell you that the ones that I believe have a chance now okay, I'm done. There's other shoes to drop. Most conventional wisdom in this, which is very conventional, right, expects that he is trying to focus on the Trump, to the extent that there is anything focused on the administration by the end of August, because you start getting into campaign season between the end of, or start of September and November. If you think that there's something else to drop there, you kind of got another 5 or 6 weeks where something else, in all likelihood, I believe, is going to. 2, Manafort's going on trial in early September. They've notified about a 3 or 4 week trial. I don't know what he's going to say, I don't know what he's going to do, but that ain't going to be good headlines for the president, but that's going to happen. 3, Michael Cohen. Right? Who knows? 4, it is not inconceivable to me that President Trump recognizes, he said this, that he got great press out of going to Singapore and shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. I also believe that his administration, these people in it, acknowledge the fact that the photo op was a high. The press that's come out since has basically indicated that they got played. The UN General Assembly is coming up this fall. And I would imagine that that there's going to be representatives from North Korea at the UN General Assembly. I would imagine that it's not outlandish to think that somebody has told the Kim administration, the Kim regime, that it would be appreciated by the Trump administration if they got a pretty good headline about nuclear non-proliferation 3 or 4 weeks before an election. I don't know which way all of these things, I don't know if all of those things are going to come true. I don't know which way all of those things are going to go. Last one, I'd say 5, tariffs. Right? And if he goes to, as he said this past weekend, if he'll increase those tariffs up to $500 billion from the $200 billion to the full trade balance with China, he has the ability to dial that up and dial it back. Those are pivot points between now and the end of October. I don't know exactly how all of those are going to play out, but I know that they are going to impact that election landscape come the end of October, which means the landscape for some of these races is going to change. Some of those top challenges that we look at, some, I don't think very many, might fall off. Some of them, in all likelihood, I think, are going to put far more places in play. And some of them, I do expect this, we've already seen this happen with 2 races that were top-tier Democratic pickups, where Republicans have essentially dropped out. And they went from races that we thought we had good candidates but were in the fight, to now essentially non-contested. So, that field is dynamic a bit. I'm happy to give you that list of 25 to 30. Bryan might not know this yet. That started with 20, we got to 25, I think there might be about 10 more coming. At the end of September to say, hey, things are moving. But, yeah. Good. How does the Pennsylvania redistricting look for the Democrats? Pennsylvania was one of the states across the country, not the only, but that was gerrymandered terribly under Republican, after Republican State House victory. Democrats were able to kind of peel back the layers on this. You all are probably familiar with the fact there's been constitutional claims up to the Supreme Court to try to create more balance in this redistricting effort. The Supreme Court has punted on those efforts. What happened in Pennsylvania, though, was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Democrats actually won the state Supreme Court seat that was the flip seat. So we had control of the state Supreme Court for the first time in a very long time. They then brought a state constitutional claim, not U.S. constitutional claim, but a state constitutional claim up to the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. That Democratic majority found for the Democrats, found for the petitioners, and redrew the line. It switched, has the potential to flip 4 different seats in the congressional delegation. One of those, one of the folks that were early on our list, was Chrissy Mullin, who's this extraordinary young woman, 3 kids, career in the Air Force, started an apparel company, and then was one of the founders of Decoy. She's like 6 years older than me. What a kid. So she was going to have a real challenger. She was challenging an incumbent. It's going to be a real race. Those lines changed. The incumbent Republican there dropped out. We feel pretty good. Mary Kay Scanlon is running in a newly drawn seat there. She's a state representative. That was a 17 a potential for 2 to 3 more pickups, 2 more pickups there as well, including, well, in addition to Connor Lamb, who is essentially running again in a new district that is a Republican district. This race hasn't gotten as much attention this time around because it's far less Republican than it was before. It's still a Republican seat. And he's running against an incumbent that is stalwart conservative. He's just not obnoxious about it. But it means that, like, that's still a real race. Connor needs help. So we have ground zero for this in my mind is actually New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We have the chance in New Jersey to pick up 4 seats at least. You need a clean sweep through there, but I will say for those 2 states, in New Jersey in particular, the two policy issues that Republicans are counting on to carry them through and to be able to make the argument for conservatives as to why they should keep the House: healthcare and taxes. Healthcare and taxes are devastating to New Jersey. That tax bill has been devastating, and the healthcare bill, the entire New Jersey Hospital Association was against it. So we've got the chance to flip 4 seats in New Jersey alone. So we're working on it. Yeah.
Congress prior to the election to do anything substantial to secure our voting system. I know we talk a lot about it, and I know that it's not getting funded properly, but is there anything that can happen?
Congress can do a lot to secure our voting system. We're just not doing it.
What can we do as voters to participate in that?
So,
Other than call our
so I think one, unquestionably, part of this is more and additional federal resources and federal coordination from aspects of our intelligence community that are seeing and have seen in the FBI that they believe that Russians are continuing to meddle, which they are. That they can kind of pass some of that information down to local authorities and state authorities so that they can make some of those corrections. Some of those state authorities just don't have that. But also recognize these are a lot of it's done state by state, right? So it's where secretaries of state, it's largely them, not exclusively, I don't believe, but largely their responsibilities in these other states. They can be taking the initiative to try to make sure that they are insulated, that they have, if not just all electronic voting, so that if there is a problem, there's a paper ballot that people could actually go back and count. So pushing the one is, yes, the push at the federal level. The other is, if you know people in those states that have been subject to this, that they are pushing at the local level to their state reps, to their state senators, to their governor, to their constitutional offices, to their secretaries of state, saying, hey, you got to address this. What are you guys doing? And the sooner the better. Department of Homeland Security has done there has been some support there. There just hasn't been nearly enough. And states, as we all know, they are on pretty strict budgets. They can't just, if there's something that comes up, they can't just find $50 million in October to solve this problem, right? But there is a local lever too, where Bill Galvin, after this issue came out last week, Bill Galvin there was news stories saying, hey, this is what Massachusetts has done, this is what we still could do. Yes, it would be great to get federal support, but X. Put every other Secretary of State on the spot. Yeah.
Do you think the two-party system is viable in the United States?
Do I think the two-party system is still viable? Yeah, it's still viable.
How will it work given the fact that the agreement with both sides are basically hypothetical?
So, look, is it still viable? Yes, and it's largely still viable because if there was another major party, there's the structures of it. The two parties themselves are not the ones prohibiting a third party from happening. The additional structures of it are essentially prohibitive, right? But there's nothing that's stopping another party from coming together and forming and saying, hey, we don't like either ones of you, and so we're going to do our own thing, right? It's not, the structural barriers to entry are there, right? But if I could solve 2 challenges, if I was king for a day, nonpartisan redistricting and campaign finance. And I realize that I'm saying that at a fundraiser. Thank you very much. It is the incentive structure people are really angry at Congress, and again, deservedly so. Right? We're not doing a whole lot there to go back and I think earn the credibility with the American public. That being said, Congress is a reflection of the districts that are drawn and the system that funds it. And that system is, given the structures that exist, that system is going to give you the gridlock that you're getting. I don't think that an additional party solves that problem, given the way that the structures actually work, and particularly in Congress. I think we have to start to be a bit more creative about what some of those solutions might be. Assuming, even if it's not Judge Kavanaugh that gets confirmed on the court, but it's another conservative justice, you essentially have set for the next 30 years a very conservative view of the First Amendment when it comes to campaign finance law. They're not overturning Citizens United. So if you want to do that, you're either going to have to find a constitutional amendment, or you're going to have to come up with other ways of addressing the campaign finance. I don't think looks like you still have part of their question, or I haven't answered all of it.
No, and I know the U.S. is not, we're not set up for three parties. But it seems as if, anybody who is in the center is being disenfranchised. And that's troublesome to me. And I think troublesome over the longer term to America. I don't know how you fix it. Because the progressive side of the Democratic Party, where we have ways, the other conservative side of the Republican Party are
And that is, so undeniably, the energy from both parties are kind of at the edges. And that's where they are empowered by districts that are drawn deeper and deeper conservative on the right, deeper and deeper blue on the left, and then the financial mechanisms that go in and fund. That is where nonpartisan redistricting, I think, shifts that a bit. There's always going to be a bell curve of people in this country. That's fine. It's just that if you had some folks that are diehard conservatives, and you spread them out about between 3 or 4 districts rather than concentrating them in one, their voices are still heard. They still get a chance to contribute, right? But they're going to be spread out amongst a cross-section of individuals that are a broader reflection of the American electorate, rather than concentrating them in one district, where then no matter the person that's going to get elected there is going to be the most conservative person that runs. And that's what we got to do. And that's why from my perspective, the loss in 2016 was so devastating, because under an alternative reality, which is nice to think of, although, I cry myself to sleep at night about this. Justice Garland on that court, Janet's decision comes down the other way, right? You still got whatever is left of worker and union power in that tilt that's been systemic now for a couple of decades. That aspect of it is at least maintained. There's a chance that you get a ruling on partisan gerrymandering, which actually puts the entire construct of the House of Representatives up for grabs. And I don't just celebrate that because, hey, it means you have a much better chance of winning back the House. It means the House is more competitive every single cycle. It means that people across the political spectrum, you have to compete for their views and their voices. That's what we need. And the alternative fight that we have in this is you got to go state by state. Which again, that doesn't mean you don't do it, but that does mean you got a knockdown, drag out, bare enough, a brawl, state by state, Supreme Court justice by local Supreme Court justice. But that's what we got to do. And so is the pathway there? Yeah, but it's a harder pathway. Yeah.
I have a question about the Electoral College. Has there been any talk about getting rid of the antiquated policy about the electrical college instead of the popular vote?
There's been some. I've heard conversations about it. It's obviously not a top of line policy priority given the construct of kind of the immediate challenges that we're up against. Another idea that kind of gets thrown around there that is just I think kind of a similar regards to structural reform, is the House representation is set at 435, and I think it dates back to 1920, but it's not in the Constitution. And so you could, in theory, just add 100 members to the House of Representatives and just say no members should represent more than, we represent roughly, and it varies state by state, roughly 700,000 people now. Just make it 500,000 people. And what you would end up doing, you know, it's not pure, Democrats don't purely benefit from this, but it means that yes, states California, Texas, New York, Florida are going to get a lot more members. But it does mean that if you are concerned that there is a rural vote that is, a rural voice that is accentuated much more highly than their representation, particularly when you look at the fact that in the Senate, California is worth just as much as Oklahoma, right? Which again, part of the founding structures, but it does mean that rural votes are already have a huge advantage in the way that our society or the way that our government is structured. For those urban states and urban centers to have those diluted as much as they are still in the House, put more members in. And if you have more members in, you can try to gerrymander it the way that they have, but you're also just going to have more members that are representing more urban centers. And the big movement that we've seen of late is not necessarily, you know, conservative, progressive, it's urban-rural. But that urban-rural divide is getting far more acute. And because of the structures, the way that those governing structures are drawn, it does accentuate the weight of the rural vote far more heavily than an urban vote. So just try to balance that out.
But I mean, any way that the electoral college can be abolished, you know, and just the popular vote be
I don't
what?
see that happening. I think if
I mean, that was 250 years ago.
the same. So yes, to try to do that is, I don't see Republican senators or senators from, even if you have a 60+ vote majority in the Senate, from smaller states voting to totally gut the influence and power that they have. So, you know, that's
really antiquated.
so the flip side of that is saying, okay, the Senate was designed for equal representation in every state, right? That there's a value to that, but let's make sure that we also have a chamber that is one where it's supposed to be the people's house and where the popular voice carries is supposed to be close to the people in a more populous body. Let that happen. And they're not. So, anybody else?
Joe, great.
Go
ahead.
Sorry.
No.
But just going forward with 2020 and the census, obviously, is going to affect, obviously, the districts moving forward.
Oh.
How do we move forward, not just focus on 2018, but as all of these states, especially in the Midwest, that are, you know, Republican right now, but moving towards Democratic government for 2020?
So, there's actually a lot in that answer.
I know that was a big question.
So, first thing you mentioned was the census. It was interesting. As this administration was getting started, I spoke with somebody that has some very close ties with a number of individuals in the administration. And he said, you know, is there anything structurally that you would want to say to them, that's like areas of bipartisanship, whatever else? Because we were starting out with the healthcare stuff, and as much as I would have loved to have done a bipartisan in healthcare, not going to happen. But one of the ones that I said was, if you can, try to put in a word to have them not mess with the census. You know what they did? Mess with the census. So they're getting sued 6 weeks from Tuesday on the census. That's a big deal, right? And they're not just doing, from what my understanding of it, and it's been a little while since I've been briefed on it, but census funding is essentially nothing for more or less 8 years. A big boost and then a massive boost, right? Because it's done every 10 years. And the vast majority of the money in the census goes to tracking people down who didn't turn in their mailer in the mail, right? And if you turn it in, so there's a big effort to try to make sure people turn it in. They do these test runs on it. They do technology on it. Where cut the funding earlier on, so you're not going to be nearly as ready for it as you should be, which means you're going to have to spend far more money later if you want to count people. But if you don't want to count people, you don't spend the money later, and then you scare the crap out of people to make sure that they don't answer it, and then they don't answer the door. So the last remedy in this, and by the time you get to 2020, it's too late. Right? Really, by the time you get to 2019, a lot of that's late because you're trying to inject money into a system that just takes a long time to actually make the thing work. You can probably, if we win the House back, there's probably some stuff we can do, but it's harder. But that's why there's a big court fight filed this past week, or a judge actually found this past week that this was, given the inconsistent statements of Secretary Ross, that they had some questions to answer, and I think he stated the question. With regards to these other states, look, it ends up being there is a lot more attention being played to state legislative races, state House and state Senate races than there were before. I'm going to get into some more of those details offline with you, but there's a lot of folks that are very cognizant of the power of those races and are trying to figure out where exactly to kind of focus on.
That's it.
So folks, I think it's pretty clear. The first step is to win back the House. Anybody who wants to look at that list, you can reach out to Joe, you can reach out to myself, and we'll make sure that we get that out to you. We appreciate the time that you gave today. We want to thank Liz's Cafe for the amazing State Senator Julian Sears stepped in the middle of all this. And again, Dan, thank you for hosting this.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.